Hello all, and welcome to the fourth session of the Anxiety Workshop, which is all about how we can help our students to manage their anxiety through co-regulation. You may think, why co-regulation? Well, co-regulation helps them to learn how to regulate for themselves. So through us doing it with them and modelling in how we're behaving and we're managing our actual situations ourselves, it really supports them in learning that they can cope, they can find ways to calm themselves down, and then they're more likely to be able to try that out for themselves when they're on their own. So as per usual, we're going to go into the straight into the presentation. And you'll see here that on the first slide, the first thing I talk about in bold there and caps is that in our role as co-regulators, I'd like you to think of yourselves as containers of their emotions. What I mean by that is that, how does that look? That looks like us holding students' emotions metaphorically, being with their emotions, tolerating rather than reacting. We're back on this pause and notice, just observe to begin with, try and avoid stepping in and trying to fix. It's just about being okay with what's going on for the students in the first place. And in terms of their behaviour, thinking about the behaviours of communication, and when they're acting out, they are communicating through their actions because their access to communicate and thinks clearly has disappeared. It's not functioning, so they act through their behaviour. So focus on the meaning of the behaviour rather than the behaviour itself. I know that's a mindset, I know that's a practice, but just try and be mindful of that rather than homing in on what they're doing. Try and, just be curious. Now, I wonder why you did that, or I wonder if you're doing that because of this, or you're trying to say this, or I hear or I see that you're doing. And this is obviously delivered with empathy. Empathy is important here, compassion. And so just be curious. Try and keep things on a level, on an equal level. Be respectful towards them. We have, the propensity for power differentials in schools is huge anyway. You've got the age difference, and when you're getting into feelings of difference like that, there's a tendency very quickly for people to feel shamed. So we're going back to that thing that we talked about at the beginning. Shamed people shame. If you start blaming, you're shaming. So please think about that in terms of when students are acting out. And it is really difficult, it's really challenging at times, and of course it's very frustrating, and sometimes it can feel unbearable. And also remember, self-compassion for yourselves, you're not always going to handle it perfectly. You're still going to get caught sometimes up on the ceiling with them. But what we're aiming for is to get them in that safe zone so that they can actually start to verbalise what's going on and communicate it instead of acting it out. And the way that we get them into the safe zone is through non-verbal cues for safety. Non-verbal because at this point the verbal and the thinking parts of the brain are pretty ineffective, especially if people are highly aroused. So they're in the primitive brain state, they're back in that reptilian brain state, the reasoning brain switched off, the hearing may be impaired. And cues for safety manifest non-verbally, implicitly, through how we act, how we are with them, who we're being, how close you are. If somebody's in flight mode, they may find it really difficult to be near people, so we might need to adjust our proximity. Thinking about how you speak, the tone of your voice, the speed of your voice, the volume of your voice. Notice how I'm speaking now. It just starts to slow down and calm down, and that in itself is calming. It says, I've got a handle on this, so we're all going to get a handle on this. You're smiling. Eye contact's really important, but not staring. And there are many other cues, and I'm not going to go into them all now because there's a supporting document on this that goes into quite a lot of detail around the very specific situation we're in post-COVID, but also about how to apply cues for safety in and around the classroom and in school. So you've got that alongside the presentation. So I just want to draw your attention to that and not go into too much detail here. And again, it's just remembering that we're trying to shift from the reptilian brain state to the rational brain state. Even the emotional brain state, which sits in the middle, that's where, the limbic brain is where we're feeling emotions. That's the domain of fixed patterns of behaviour. So that also falls into where students are acting out. are behaving in difficult and challenging ways, where they just go into, you know, their sort of fixed way of doing things that again can be quite annoying to ongoingly witness. They're not in their rational human brain state at that moment in time. Their capacity to act as teenagers, young adults, it is severely limited. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I've just listed some more strategies and techniques here, many of which we've already talked about. I've again reiterated the need to pause, reflect on your own reaction, and how you're feeling, and modelling those cues for safety, as I say. Also the box breathing, use the box breathing exercise. There are grounding techniques, really good grounding techniques. About the idea of grounding techniques is to bring people back into the here and now, into the present moment. There's a leaflet that you've also got to give you more details on that. So again, I'm not going to go into that in detail. It details it all. It's about connecting in with your 5 senses. So touch, taste, smell, hearing, talking, sometimes just getting them to talk, you know, what were you up to on the weekend, whatever it is, get them off whatever, you know, the thing that they're thinking about. Have a laugh with them if you can, depending on where they are on that spectrum of anxiety, and maybe get them to do some body movement, walk and talk, or some of the tension release that we went through earlier. Definitely, if you're in a classroom capacity, incorporate that into pre-classroom time or tutor time. And some other things there, you can use stress balls, distraction, as I say, laughter. What we want to try and get away from is blaming, talking about the behaviour, focusing on the behaviour. That's for when they're calm, that's for another time, that reflection. And unfortunately, another thing that can really trigger defensive patterns is saying you're safe, or it's okay and there's nothing to worry about. And come on, really, it's not that bad. Because people can start to feel that you're, firstly, they're not understood, they're not heard, and you're not in tune, you're not aligned with them. And this is really important. I bring up the cues, the conduits for getting in the safe zone again, because we talk about attunement. This is about feeling somebody's walking with me, somebody really gets me, really gets where I'm at right now. It's a dilemma for all of us as humans when we're distressed. That feeling of aloneness, that feeling nobody understands, nobody really cares how I feel or understands right now. And that's what you're trying to model. You're just trying to really give that through compassion, heart, not head, as I said much earlier. Thinking, you know, coming at it from your heart, feeling what they're feeling, maybe just sitting there silently, maybe there's nothing to say, but just to acknowledge it, just to witness it with them quietly and calmly. And that in itself will help them to calm down. They're in the survival mode, and to get out of the survival mode, the first thing we need really attentive listening, and we need compassion. And if you do nothing else, just do those 2 things. If you can't remember anything else, just listen properly, feedback what they're saying, don't give them solutions, don't give them fixes, and just do it with a lot of compassion. And ultimately have compassion for yourself, for however you deal with it, it is good enough. Finally, there is the slide with the list of helpful responses, yet again to remind you of things that you can be doing. But this isn't about remembering everything. It is just about taking 1 or 2 things, and that will make a difference for yourselves and for the students you're working with. And thank you for listening. Bye-bye.